seated. Thank you. My son gave me a good wave on the way up here, so fills my cup. It's good to see you guys. I'm glad we were able to make it back. I know that a lot of you are very tired. I'm very thankful that you're here. Coming straight from Lads to Leaders is rough. So we were a little, well, I shouldn't say a little, we were 40 short this morning. So it was a combination of Lads to Leaders and people sick. It was pretty crazy. So we missed you guys a lot. And I'm thankful for Bill leading us in songs this morning. And anyway, so I'm glad you guys are here and back with us. So as we do, I had a little here about Lads Leaders, but Ron said stuff there, and I'm glad he did. I'm glad our kids do it. I'm glad this congregation sees the usefulness of it and participates in it. It's a really big deal. Not every congregation sees the need to do these things, sees the fruit of doing them. Like, they don't think it's fruitful, and it is. And so I'm thankful that you guys are supportive of that. I'm thankful for the parents and the people who do a lot for these kids. So, and these kids rise to the occasion every time. They give it, they put their heart into it. It's wonderful to see. Huh? Yeah, and they won puppet theater, right? Yeah, and so it would be surprising if they didn't. They just have done so well so many years in a row. I remember, I won't say it. Never mind. I could see some frustration in other congregations in that room, like, we better take it home this year. And I think Windsor does a really good job. Those ladies put some tremendous talent, creativity. It's just as much the kids, but the women who have done so much planning and creativity and put great dialogue, and it's costumes, all of it. It's amazing, truly. So anyway, as we do on Sunday evenings, I usually take a chunk of the past few sermons that are material that is left over, and I use it and do a closer examination of the text that I just simply can't do during a Sunday service without us going off on a tangent that probably is interesting but not adding to the overall sermon. And so I save that material and we go over it here. So if you want, you can turn to 1 Kings chapter 18. That's what we're going to go through tonight. There's some interesting things I'm excited to talk about with you. Things that I'm actually hopeful maybe you caught in the text as we were going through it on Sunday morning. So if you remember what's going on, Elijah has come back after 3.5 years of a drought, and it's a judgment of God against Israel, but mainly, or maybe I should say it backwards, Ahab, but also the rest of Israel. Like, they're all combined into it because they all, even though Ahab led them with bad leadership, and certainly Jezebel, into paganism, they gave in headlong to it. So it wasn't just a punishment to Ahab. He could have done other things that was a punishment just to Ahab. It was also a judgment on Israel in general. And so after God was showing Ahab and his people that the false god Baal was not real and that he was the one true God, and they gave up the one living and true God for a false one, which is terrible. One that could not save. And so Elijah shows up, his name meaning Yahweh is God, and he meets with King Ahab mysteriously, randomly, just opens up with chapter 17 that way. He just comes up to Ahab, appears out of nowhere, and is giving this message from God. Well, fast forward to verse 19 of chapter 18, we know all that of how this all happened. And now they have officially, he's met back with Ahab. They've met at Mount Carmel. And in verse 19, this is what he's saying, he's saying to meet at Mount Carmel. So verse 19 says, "Now then send and gather to me all of Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, who eat at Jezebel's table. we talked about that awesome showdown and what happens there, the battle of the gods, but really there was no battle to begin with because Jehovah Elohim is the only God, and therefore there's no contest between him and idols. It's like a people asking an imaginary man to do battle with a real man. The battle is not within a physical one. It's a mental battle to convince them that they're making up an imaginary man. It's like, what battle is there between an imaginary man and a living one? There's no contest, right? But the contest is mental. You have to convince them that the opponent isn't real while proving that you certainly are real. And that's really what was going on because there is no battle against God. There is no battle of strength. That he is God. Everything else is created by him. It's absurd. Maybe in the most tiny fraction of the way, and it really doesn't even do justice. But, it's like a baby fighting a father. You're toast. You have no ability. And maybe on an even bigger scale, it's like a flea fighting a human. It's just not going to turn out in your favor. There's no contest. So we know what happens. Both Elijah and the prophets of Baal call on their deity, and the one who answers is the true God. After the prophets of Baal cry out to him all day, there's no response. But in grand contrast, Elijah says a simple prayer, and God powerfully shows up and he answers, and the fire consumes everything that's on the altar. Okay, so the first place I want to do is jump back to verse 19. It says, "Now then, send and gather to me all of Israel at Mount Carmel, together with 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." We talked about the difference between Baal and Asherah and how they're a couple deity. Like as in, and it's weird because with those kind of mythologies and stuff, you have like a breaking down of, it's not necessarily a husband and wife, it's like a mother, but still there's a relationship that way. And basically, she brings something to the table that Baal doesn't, and so combined together, their force is even stronger. But Baal is the ultimate one. He's stronger, and so we talked about what that looks like, that a lot of times a pole would be next to Baal's statue, and that would represent Asherah, the deity, the goddess, right? And so she brought fertility, whereas he brings crops and a lot of other things. And so... both are mentioned, and both are kind of hand in hand together. But now look at verse 22. Maybe you picked this up when we were going through the text. Hopefully you did. Then this is later, after they all meet at Mount Carmel, and it says in verse 22, when they're beginning to do the contest, the challenge, "Then Elijah said to the people, I alone am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men." Okay, so all he's mentioning here is the 450 men of Baal. That's it. He doesn't say that he's facing 850. He's saying he's facing 450. And so, jump down to verse 40. "Then Elijah said to them, Seize," this is after all of it happens, "seize the prophets of Baal. Do not let one of them escape." So once they finally fall down and worship God, because he answers with fire from heaven, he tells them to seize all the prophets. And the prophets that he says specifically are the prophets of Baal. Okay, so what's really interesting about that is Elijah called for all of them. He called for all that sat at Jezebel's table as well, which is the other 400 prophets of Asherah. Where are they at? It's a good question to begin to ask yourself. What we learned from the text by chapter 19, we're going to get into next week, Jezebel's not there. Ahab's there. And Ahab's prophets are there, as in the ones who he works closely with to serve Baal. They showed up. But Jezebel's table and the prophets of Asherah, they didn't show up. That's what the text is implying. He invited, and he says, let's do this. Bring them all. Bring 850 of your prophets. All of you can cry out. And when they actually show up, it's only Baal's prophets that show up. Asherah and the Jezebel, they're still back in Jezreel, which you're going to see in chapter 19. I find that really interesting because I think there is something within Jezebel and her pride that says, we're not doing that. we're not going up there. And so Ahab brings Baal and his prophets, and he goes. But it is interesting that she's not there, and it's interesting how she reacts. Maybe it's good she didn't come. Maybe we'll see that there was providence working, that she wasn't there at the scene because of how she reacts immediately to the news of what happened there. But it's still something to ask. He called for all of them, and then he's only addressing the prophets of Baal. So you should be asking, like, what that is. Is it discrepancy? No, because he can invite whoever he wants. He can't guarantee they show up, right? So, okay, so that's just an interesting thing there, and really maybe no tie back. And I'm going to tie it back to this next point I want to come across. So verses 25 through 28. Let's go back up to that text. So Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose one ox for yourselves and prepare it first for you and many, and call on the name of your God, but put no fire under it." Look specifically at verse 26, though. "Then they took the ox which was given them, and they prepared it, and they called on the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, 'O Baal, answer us.' But there was no voice, and no one answered, and they leaped about the altar which they made. From morning until noon, 'O Baal, answer us.'" I imagine with that kind of time, they are saying a lot. There's a lot being said. That is a lot of time. That's why I think Elijah gets irritated, and he's sitting, watching them act like fools from morning until noon, and finally he starts mocking them. "Oh, maybe you should cry a little louder. Maybe you need to wake Baal up. Maybe he's out relieving himself. Maybe he's out on vacation. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he's asleep." And well-deserved. But you could at least say, well, Elijah held his tongue from morning till noon. I don't know if I could have done any better, watching them act like idiots for hours. And you're just like, are we done here? Can we finish up? I got things to do. So anyway, I imagine there's a lot being said. Now look at Matthew 6, 5 through 8. "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him." Babbling like pagans. It's traditional. By Jesus' time, it was very well known that this is how pagans spoke. This is how they acted. And so another translation with babbling like pagans is, "Do not use meaningless repetition like the pagans do, for they think they'll be heard for their many words." Pagans will say much in a prayer in rhythmic mumblings and using many words repetitively, babbling and crying out to their gods, thinking they'll be heard just because they're saying words, just because they're saying all kinds of repetitive babblings. But Jesus says that we don't need to do this, that this is not what we need to do. And when you compare that to what's happening in 1 Kings 18, it's amazing, because you see all of them from morning until noon. Just, for one, the only thing it says that they're saying that we see is, "Oh, Baal, answer us," right? But I guarantee they're saying other stuff. But that alone, even if they're saying that alone, that's very repetitive. You're just saying that over and over again for hours. I'm sure you get delirious. I'm sure it just starts to not even sound like the same words after a while, after they're just trying so hard to cry out to this imaginary God. So I think it's really interesting that Jesus says this. But he also says that this is the way of pagans, mindless mumblings and emotionally crying out with very little substance behind their words. They think if they cry out to Baal and say, "Answer us," loudly and repetitively, that's what will do it. But that's not how we get the ear of the one true God. It's not loud. It's not mindlessness. But as Elijah tells the prophets of Baal to shout louder, he reminds us that you have to be loud and mindless while approaching a false idol, because they are dumb and deaf. And in order to approach a false idol, you have to become like them, mindless with hearts of stone. You're not. It's not an emotional relationship or one which gives back. So it is mindless. God gives you a Bible full of his words so that you can know him, so that you can be close to him. He puts his words in your heart. He gives you his spirit. It is a very close relationship. You know God. He invites you to call him Father. He calls you sons and daughters. You're born into the family of God when you are baptized into Christ. And so there is this family element. There is this relationship, this covenant element that everything else lacks. And so when God invites you to talk to him, like Jesus says, it is with mindfulness and clarity and not repetitiveness. Because when I come home to my wife, if I say the same 4 words over and over again, and that's all I say to her, what relationship is that? It's no relationship. If that's all you say to your spouse, just a few choice words, there's no relationship, right? So you expect when you're in a relationship to have many, many different conversations, getting to know each other, love each other. God wants to hear all those things. God wants to know your heart, or he does know your heart. He wants you to share your heart with him. And he, through his words and through his spirit, helps you to know him. And so there's a great give and take there, and he doesn't want you to be like pagans. Pagans are in a emotionless, and really the way I say that is wrong because it's filled with tons of emotion, those Baal's prophets. But it is not the type of emotion that's involved in a true relationship, like love, like commitment, like give and take of a true covenant. That's not what that is. It's let me just mindlessly cry out to you until hopefully we get what we want, till the crops grow, till the rain comes. But there's no, Baal, I love you. Baal, thank you for, loving me. And we're going to see just how that goes even further. So verse 27 through 28, it came about at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, call out with a loud voice, for he's a god. Either he's occupied or gone aside or on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep, and he needs to be awakened. So they cry with a loud voice, and they take his advice. And they cut themselves according to their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out on them. Okay, so a part of Jesus and his acknowledgement of babbling of the pagans because of their ways and what they did, the people would have immediately thought of scenes like this in 1 Kings 18. And so with pagans, also their crying out was hurting themselves. They slashed themselves. They cut themselves. And these weapons that they're described as using, lances and swords, when you go back and look at resources of what this looked like, they were very sharp, very capable weapons of war that they were using. This is not like, oh, let me get a rock. They would cut themselves wide open. That's why it says the blood gushed out of them. It gushed out of them. So Hosea 7:14 is a really interesting verse. It says, they do not cry out to me from their hearts, but wail on their beds. They slash themselves, appealing to their gods for grain and new wine, but they turn away from me. The Septuagint reading of this verse says they slash themselves. That's why it's in there, appealing to their gods. It may say something else like pining or something else. They're yearning to get their attention, but the Septuagint translates that as how they're doing that is by slicing themselves open. So what's interesting about Hosea, if you know the background of that book, that's to the Israelites, okay? God is talking now to his people. And he's saying that they're not crying out for me in their hearts. They're wailing on their bedside, and they're slashing themselves trying to get the attention of other gods. He's talking to Israelites now. So by the time of Hosea, they had actually adopted these pagan ways to say, well, I guess if God won't hear our cries, if we're in such bad, if it's destitute and things are, we're in a terrible situation, well then, we'll cut ourselves like the pagans did to try to get his attention. They've adopted those kinds of idolatrous ways. And he's saying, but they turn away from me. That's how he ends that verse. They are appealing to their gods, slashing themselves open, but they turn away from me. So it looks like they really did exactly what the people were doing in Israel. And so God strictly warned against this. And the reason I say that is even in Israel, they obviously adopted these things. But it wasn't all of Israel, right? It was the few prophets that Ahab and Jezebel found. And so they could have been from a more pagan society like Jezebel was, or they could have found other people. It didn't mean that all of those came from Israel. They could have. But they could have been so far removed from a generation of believing in God that all they knew was pagan and idolatry. Whereas Hosea, he's just talking about his people, like the crowd. And they're going to that kind of extreme to get God's attention. It's pretty heinous. And so it's something to think about. So, God strictly warns against this kind of behavior. Deuteronomy 14:1, "You are the children of the Lord, your God. Do not cut yourselves or shave the front of your heads for the dead." These are pagan practices. It's like we don't shave our heads for the dead, and we don't cut ourselves. These are the things that God says he doesn't want you doing. Don't participate in pagan rituals. And cutting yourself doesn't just mean like self-harm. It means also you're trying to get the attention of an idol. He's saying don't participate in any of that. So do not cut yourself. That's like we just talked about. That was a custom for many pagan cultures surrounding Israel at the time, such as the Canaanites and other Near Eastern people. It shows how badly they had fallen from God's law and into pagan practices in the days of Elijah. They're directly disobeying a clear command of God, whether that's because they don't know it and ignorance is rampant, it's possible, or they do know it and they don't care because they don't serve God anymore. It's like, well, God told us not to, but we're serving Baal now, and this is how Baal rolls, so this is what we're going to do. And it's pretty sad either way. So I made a point at the first of one of my sermons, and I said that the first words of Ahab to Elijah after 3 years of the drought and the judgment on the land was, "Is this you troubler of Israel?" 1 Kings 18:17. And I said that this proved that the king had obviously learned very little in the severe time of famine, verse 2, and so he was lacking any humility of what he had done. He's just like, "Are you troubler of Israel? You're back. Hey, look what damage you've caused." And Elijah's like, "Oh, me. I did this." He said, "You are the troubler of Israel. You and your fathers are the troubler of Israel." And then he challenges him at Mount Carmel with his prophets. But what I want to say by that is we talked about by the time he is actually addressing the people, Elijah in verse 21, he says, "How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, follow him." But then the text says, "But the people did not answer him a word." And so what we talked about is that shows that King Ahab was not alone in his not learning his lesson. These people had been in a drought for 3.5 years after hearing, no doubt, because Obadiah in chapter 18 said that his master Ahab had sent them everywhere, to every country looking for Elijah. Do you not think the people of Israel had heard who this Elijah was and what he did? There's not anyone saying, "Who is Elijah?" They heard about the guy who told Ahab, "The God of Israel says there will be neither dew nor rain until his word comes," and that he says so. And then there's no rain for 3.5 years. Do you think people are talking about that guy? Yes. You think there's probably a great yearning to find that man? Yes, absolutely. So the people, him showing back up, Ahab not saying he's learned anything and repenting is crazy. The people of Israel not showing that they've learned anything is even more crazy. Because sometimes you'll have crazy rulers, but the fact that they couldn't think for themselves and they're like, "Well, I guess we'll still stick it out with Baal, even though he hasn't saved us in 3.5 years. Maybe this is the year." It's crazy. And so Elijah's saying that. He's saying, "Why are you still hesitating? Don't you see? You've got to come to the side of God." And so one thing we should see here, though, is that this goes to show the danger of ignorant and deceived leaders. Their misguided words of passion towards a false god or religion especially can convince the masses to commit to something that is so dangerous to us all. And that's not just spiritually speaking. As we see here in the text, Baal's prophets were so convinced of the spiritual truth of their pagan religion that they were willing to slash themselves open in allegiance to a false god. to something that's not real. They were willing to slash themselves open and die. We talked about how many of those prophets. Why do you think Baal needed 450 prophets? I'm sure there's a big turnover rate. When you got a god that you have to slice your gut open and your wrists open to get his attention, it's like, next, bring in the next ones. That's a lot of prophets, and it's a bad turnover rate. They're dying, and they're willing to die. They're willing to watch all of this pooling of blood and all these things, and they're willing to just keep dying for an idol. And so it's really scary. People can commit to ridiculous things because of their false teachings that they've been taught, even if they're not even entirely sure it's true, which is really scary. That's how people are. You can put an idea in their mind, and what it shows and what we see is that spiritually blind leaders can have a terrible effect on the masses. They are the definition of the blind leading the blind, like Jesus says, and they will confidently lead themselves and all who follow them closely right off the cliff. They'll do it. They will do it. They will just say, I know what I'm talking about. And they say, follow me. And all the doofuses that are willing to follow, you guys will all die together. You'll run straight off the cliff. Because if you follow him too close or her too close or whoever it is, they're not going to see it coming. They're going to die, and you're going to die too. You're going to suffer the same consequences. And so that's something to be very, very aware of. Okay, that's enough said about that. So 1 Kings 18:30-35. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. So all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which had been torn down. Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, Israel shall be your name. So with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar, large enough to hold 2 measures of seed. Then he arranged the wood and cut the ox in pieces and laid it on the wood. And then he said, fill 4 pitchers with water and pour it on the burnt offerings. And he told him to do it 3 different times. And so the people came near to him. He began to rebuild the altar. Now, I made a statement a couple Sundays ago that I think I may have in the moment not made it clear enough, so I want to make it clear. So I said the prophets of Baal had knocked down his altar, which is true, but I should have made it and clarified a bit more. It's not that the prophets of Baal built their altar and then Elijah built his, and then they knocked his over the same day or in the same moment. They probably weren't altars that were close to each other. But that's not what's going on. The altars would have already been established because in that time they were. In the instructions in the text, there's nowhere that it says that they're building the altars. They're only preparing what's going on the altars. In verse 23, now let them give us 2 oxen and let them choose one of ox for themselves and cut it up and place it on the wood, but put no fire under it, and I will prepare the other ox and lay it on the wood, and I will not put fire under it. The instructions were for the ox to be cut up, placed on the wood, but what was the wood laid upon? It was laid upon the altar, right? And when you get down to verse 33, you'll certainly see this is true, because the fire, when it came down on the altar, it says it got the wood, it got the ox, and it got the stone, and it got the dirt. So there's no mentioning of stone because that would have already been established. We're only talking about preparing the top of the altar. So Baal already had altars set up all around Israel in that time. This is why we read that Baal's prophets immediately were able to prepare the ox and lay it down, verse 26, because they were using one of the altars that was already established in that location at Mount Carmel, which would have been certainly a good location for them to establish it. And it's something, had a lot of biblical meaning too. So this brings us back to our text. When it was Elijah's turn, he had to rebuild or repair the altar. He wasn't able to just immediately prepare the sacrifice like the pagan prophets. His process was different. And now I said it was because the altar of the Lord had been torn down by them, verse 30, and it was. But we aren't to think this happened in the context of the challenge itself, like they went over and were like knocked over his altar. That's not what's going on. And I think when you color it in, it gives you more appreciation. So chapter 16 shows the progressive and pervasive spreading of paganism in Israel. It shows us that under the reign of Ahab and Jezebel, the altars of the Lord are going to start becoming obsolete and neglected, but also tore down. If Israel doesn't serve God anymore, then they would begin constructing new altars for Baal immediately, and they would leave the others in the past to fade away, much like their faith. But it also seems that the things of the Lord were brought down purposely. Now, we can see that being pointed out in the text in chapter 18, verse 4. Remember Obadiah and what he says in verse 3 and 4? He's a God-fearing man. And then verse 4, it says, "For when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in the cave and provided them with bread and water." So that verse alone tells you if she's killing all the prophets of the Lord, do you think she's going to let all the altars of the Lord stand? No. It's a complete, decimation of everything that belongs to Yahweh. So what the text is saying, since that came before, is that the prophets of the Lord and the altars of the Lord were destroyed. They were knocked down so that Baal's altars could stand. And so it brings a lot, it really enriches this text, because you go to chapter 19, verse 10. Although we haven't got there, we'll get there next week. But listen to what it says. It tells us straight up, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts," he replied, "but the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I am the only one left, and they're seeking my life as well." So he's referring to the past years of Israel and how far they have fallen and deeper into idolatry. So this exact wording in chapter 18, verse 30 is the same one there, where it says, "tore down your altars." That's exactly what it says in 18 verse 30, that his altar had been torn down, the altar of the Lord. So it seems that sometime during the reign of Ahab, some of the prophets had knocked down this altar of the Lord. And now Elijah has come and he repairs it and rebuilds it in this moment before all of Israel. And I think that strengthens the text a little bit, makes it more potent, because he's now calling them all over to himself. That's why he says, "Come near to me." It means there was already a place that the altar of the Lord was. And their altar's probably over here a ways, and he's not building his right next to theirs because he's not building it. He's going to a site that was already built. That's why he says, "Come here." And he guides the people over to him because he's standing at another altar that's already been built. And then he repairs it, which let's look at that. So verse 31, "Elijah took 12 stones according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, 'Israel shall be your name.'" He's reminding them with each stone, the 12 tribes of Israel. This is a really awesome place, because what he's saying is, you are God's people. You are God's people. He gave you this name. The reason you are called Israel is because God called you Israel. And so who is the God of Israel? Jehovah, not Baal. And he's reminding them of who they are. This is who you are. And there's a really cool, we don't have time to go over all of it. There's a lot more I have, but I don't want to keep you here all night. So if you drop down to verse 36, "At the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice, Elijah the prophet came near and said, 'O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel.'" I think that's so cool. Okay? So today let it be known that you are the God in Israel and that I am your servant. I've done all these things at your word. He says Abraham, Isaac, and instead of Jacob, which would be singular, he calls him Israel, because he's immediately applying it to all of them again. That is your God. He is yours, and you are his. And he's helping them to remember that sacred name. So 2 things to be noticed here is Exodus 3:6. That was the first time it was used since. So the burning bush, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob," as Moses hid his face. And so this variation of Israel, it was designed to not only proclaim the Lord as the God of Israel, but also to suggest that the name and the privileges of Israel belonged to all the sons of Jacob. So he's like, these are your privileges. These are your blessings, not Jezebel and not what she's bringing in, not the pagan culture, not all these other things that you've gotten yourself into. You're his children, and you need to come back to him. Okay? It's a cry for them to return. And so I don't really have like I always do, I don't have some kind of tying of it's just a lot of random thoughts that are extra. But it is a good thought here. You are God's. If you claim Christ, if you bear his name, you are his. You are not the devil's. You are not the world's. You are his. And you should remember that. And if you've gone too far astray, if you've adapted to other things in this world, perhaps it's time to come back to him, to be reminded of what he's done, to call you the name Christian, what he had to go through. So keep that in mind as you go through this week and this month. All right, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Stand as we sing this final song. Oh, do not let the word depart, and close thine eyes against the light. For sinner, harden not thy heart. Be saved, oh, tonight. Oh, why not tonight? Not tonight, not tonight. Oh, why not tonight? Not tonight, not tonight. Wilt thou be saved? Then why not tonight? Our blessed Lord refuses none who would to him their souls unite. Meekly obey, the work is done. Be saved, oh, tonight. Oh, why not tonight? Not tonight, not tonight. Oh, why not tonight? Not tonight, not tonight. Wilt thou be saved? Then why not tonight? Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. We missed a lot of you this morning, but we're glad that you were where you were. And everybody did well, and we had a great time together. Sorry, it just completely went away. Please remember our sick and those who need our prayers. And at this time, we'll ask Brother Terry to lead us in a closing prayer.
Will you please pray with me? Our Holy Father in heaven, thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to come here and worship with our brothers and sisters in Christ and be able to spend not just one service, but two services with you, worshiping you today and tonight. Father in heaven, thank you for this comfortable place you give us to worship. Thank you for your church. We pray that your church will continue to be blessed as this Windsor Church has been blessed. You are so full of blessings, Father in heaven. Thank you so much.